Swim published a new comic, Rick and Morty Infinity Hour, which delves deeper into Rick's past more than ever before, and I want to talk about that. But before starting, make sure you've turned on notifications for this channel so you don't miss any new videos. The first chapter of this comic starts like a Star Wars-like situation, with the Galactic Federation being infiltrated by a spy who has stolen the plans for the Federation's ultimate superweapon. After that, we see young Rick Sanchez, who supposedly used to work in NASA before starting his sci-fi adventures. However, it seems his NASA career wasn't successful at all. Despite his brilliance, the government agency had no interest in funding his wacky inventions, and in the end, we see him getting fired. After getting fired, we see him going back to his house. This is the first time when we see Rick interacting with his wife besides his fabricated flashback. It seems they have a somewhat good marriage. Diane warmly welcomes Rick and asks if he could take Beth since she has a lot of work to do, but Rick ignores her because he was stressed out by losing his job. This panel was very interesting. We could see the dynamic between Rick and Diane. If we look closely at one of the images, we can see two very interesting things. On the first picture, we can see the wedding of Rick and Diane, and in the second picture, we can see him in a spacesuit. I don't know why, but this single panel shows how bye to his wife and daughter. It seems he was driving aimlessly since he had lost his job. On his way, he found the Monogatron species, which was the alien which was shown in the second episode of the 4th season. His name is Wubbo, and he told Rick that the whole galaxy depended on him getting to Cudswell, and Rick offered him a ride. In the next panel, they have a discussion about why Wubbo said the galaxy was dependent on him, which he explained that he is part of the rebellion group against an evil empire that rules the galaxy, and he is on Earth to look for one guy to help, who is an exiled Anion advertisements that was shown in Rick and Morty. It seems they are opening new restaurants and new locations in interdimensional TV cable decades later. Well, in the next panel, Rick and Wubbo reach Cudswell. The warrior that he was talking about was Bird Person. Then we are introduced to one middle-aged lady who dropped the other names of Bird Person, which are Gurkle Bean Waffle, the Infrulian Axe, and Larry Adamson. It seems his human name version was Larry Adamson. This girl turned out to be the ex-wife of Bird Person. She hadn't seen him for 3 years, and even despite everything, she still loved him. However, her house was soon raided by intergalactic organization soldiers who quickly turned her into ashes. They instantly regret killing her since it meant a lot of paperwork for them, and thanks to their silly conversation, Rick and Wubbo were able to escape. In the next scene, we see them in McDonald's. I think this was the same restaurant that was shown in Rick's fabricated restaurant. I think it was a nice tribute to his past. In that restaurant, Wubbo and Rick have a conversation about Bird Person. Rick asks him why he is that important, and Wubbo explains their enemy and how they are pouring trillions of space dollars into a doom bomb, and that the only lead that they had about Bird Person was that his last forwarding address was in Cudswell. Rick told him that what he has learned over the years is that a place where everyone eventually ends up is New York City. We then see him and Wubbo taking a picture in front of Liberty statue. They were also at the baseball game and were met by a thug punk. Just a typical New York experience. After that, Rick took Wubbo in the club. Suddenly, the club is full of Galactic Federation soldiers, and we have been introduced to their seeming leader, who had a classic 80s villain uniform. Rick jokes about his toddler-like clothing, which irritates the villain, and chokes Rick and tells him how he knows nothing and how there are infinite universes with infinite Ricks and infinite everything. Rick is quickly joined by Wubbo, who told him that they'd never reveal their base, which made the villain let go of Rick and go for Wubbo. Rick used this moment to punch this villain guy and take his gun, which he then used against the soldiers. After that, Rick and the villain have a very hard battle. In the end, Rick came out as the winner. The name of that villain was revealed, and that was Dr. Infinity. After that, Rick and Wubbo leave the club, and they are quickly met by Bird Person, who came down from the sky. In the next panel, we can see Wubbo, Rick, and Bird Person in Rick's house. We can see Diane, who is not pleased by the situation. She reminded Rick how Rick has a drinking problem, to which Rick replied by saying that she should go to the kitchen to give him another can of beer. This made her cry and leave the room. I think this was the beginning of the moment when their marriage started failing. It was implied in the series that Diane wasn't really a fan of Rick's sci-fi adventures, and we could see that exact thing. After that, Rick and Bird Person had a very open talk. Rick was slowly going into nihilism and questioned if anything mattered, since there was already an infinite number of them. Bird Person reminded him that his life, his family, and his genes have worth, and the universe would be much darker without them. After that, he recruited Rick to join the rebel group, which he gladly accepted. In the next scene, we can see Rick going into the bedroom. I don't know if he woke Diane up and told her goodbye or not, but he seemed very sad about leaving her, and when he went to Beth's room, he could not help himself from crying and promised Beth that he'll be back and that he's doing this for her. After that, he met Bird Person and Wubbo outside and they decided to go. The second chapter starts with Gear Planet. We can see a giant spaceship which is almost the size of the whole planet shooting some kind of laser, which puts Gear people under some kind of hypnosis. The scene then changes to Rick and the gang. It seems they crash into the moon right after they depart from Earth. The situation on the ship is very tense. Rick and Wubbo are arguing about the repairment of the ship. While they are arguing, they are suddenly confronted by another ship. They do not know who just approached them, and after the door is open, we can see an old character from the series who made their debut in the comics, and that character is Crumbopulous Michael. I was very happy to see him appearing in these comics, since I believe he is one of the best characters, and I was very disappointed that he was unalived in the very first episode where he was introduced, and I always wondered about his past with Rick, and it seems this comic will exactly show that. Next to him, we can see a new character who has dog-like features and looks very masculine. They were requested by Bird Person, who signaled them in their ship as soon as it became clear that they would be unable to avoid a potentially catastrophic landing. Rick does not like this and becomes irritated by Bird Person's decision, but they are quickly joined by Crumbopulous Michael, who introduces himself as a former Imperial assassin turned rebel jack-of-all-trades, and he reveals that the guy next to him is his partner, General Oldie Canoodle. They are then invited by him on their ship, and Michael reveals their next stop, which was turned out to be the rebel base of Cybertrex. They then have a discussion about the base and mention the Battle of Planet Squanch. It seems Squanchy's planet was under the Galactic Federation and they freed it, which led to his affiliation with Rick and the gang. They note that the spaceship belongs to Dr. Infinity, however that's all the information that they possess on him. Rick does not pay attention to what Wubbo is saying, which makes Bird Person very irritated and tries to tell Rick and Crumbopulous to pay more attention to Wubbo, since that information could be very critical to freeing the sentient inhabitants of the galaxy from the grip of brutal oppression. This makes Rick annoyed and he leaves the room with Crumbopulous. This makes Bird Person delay the meeting, leaving the remaining members to be frustrated by this decision. The scene then shifts to the spaceship. We see Dr. Infinity interacting with one of his generals. We learn of his goal, which is to rule every universe. To be honest, this seemed a very general and bland motive, and I kinda expected something else, not gonna lie. Then, we see Bird Person, who is looking for Rick and Crumbopulous. It seems those two had a bonding moment. They had been drinking non-stop since they left the room. Bird Person seems extremely annoyed by Rick's careless and nihilistic viewpoints, and tells him how wrong and disappointing he truly is. This makes Rick annoyed too, and asks Crumbopulous to unalive Bird Person, which Crumb generously agrees on, but is unable to do that due to him being extremely drunk. Rick and Bird Person have a very heated conversation where the latter mentions Rick abandoning his family, which makes Rick even more angry and makes him even more careless with regards to the whole mission, and right before he could do anything, he made Bird Person extremely serious, which made him calm down and started listening to him. Bird Person started explaining about the Gromflamite weapon. According to him, it doesn't destroy the body, it enslaves the mind. Trillions of lies all brought into a single being. They call it Unity. Now this is very interesting. Unity has already made a debut in the series, in the third episode of the second season. We never knew of its origin and anything about its past beside the fact that she had some kind of past with Rick. It seems that now we learned it, and it was at first created as some kind of weapon, which later developed itself into a hive mind. Then, both Rick and Bird Person hear some weird sound. They even question its existence. They are then quickly approached by Wubbo and Crumbopulous. The latter explains that the sound only ever means that they have been captured by Dr. Infinity. His troops quickly invade their ship and take the booze. This makes Crumbopulous so sad that even Rick has to calm him down. Then Rick has an idea to use Wubbo's clothing to deconstruct them and add them to the drinks that Wubbo gives to the drunk soldiers. He is able to control them with his official non-tendon gamepad. He makes them leave the ship and creates a chaos in his enemy's base, then tells Crumbopulous Michael to finish the job, which the latter took with the greatest pleasure. It seems everything is going well, and just before Oodle Canoodle takes them out of there, some kind of force field blocks them and destroys their ship. The gang then is captured by the enemy soldiers, and that's how the second chapter ends. In the next chapter, we can see all of them being trapped in some kind of prison in the ship. Wubbo is panicking, Bird Person is annoyed, and Rick is as calm as ever. While being in that prison, Rick invents some kind of gun which bypasses the force field that was keeping them in there. The moment they're able to leave the prison, Crumbopulous takes the guard down. The whole ship is immediately reported that their prisoners are trying to escape. In order to to blend well into the crowd, they took their uniforms. Crumbopulous and Rick were looking normal in that uniform, however we couldn't say the same thing about Bird Person and Oodle Canoodle. Bird Person suggests to start their sojourn to the docking bay and ultimately to the rebellion's last stronghold. Rick tries to hack the ship's computer to pull up the ship's layout, however he is stopped by Crumbopulous, who tells him that Gromflemite soldiers don't have short-term memory capacity, so they use waylights. He is, so far, the greatest asset for this team, besides Rick, against the Gromflemites, since he possesses a lot of information about them. Because of the fact that none of their armor belongs to docking security, they are unable to go to the docking bay. Instead, they decided to go to the intelligence core. They confronted one of the intelligence squad members and asked him for a detailed layout of the ship. They introduced themselves as a top-secret unit, the Death Squad Alpha. However, the Gromflemite soldier is suspicious of them since the Death Squad Alpha died in the laxative explosion on Xanier of the Seven Moans just last week, to which Rick replied that they staged their own deaths so they could operate entirely outside of the law without scrutiny, to which Soldier Boy said that Death Squad Alpha already operated with total impunity, which is what made them rule. He didn't buy their cover story and tried to call his supervisors, however he was scared by Oldie and was later tied on to his chair. Rick tried to hack their computer but without success since their security system is so dealessly convoluted and over-engineered that you will be lucky to even get a password reset email after successfully identifying stop signs and dozens of CAPTCHAs. Rick was furious with his unsuccessful attempts to hack their computer. The Gromflemite admits that only he knows how to navigate the computer's mysteries, its deceits, its enticing curves, and supply code. Rick demanded that Gromflemite be untied and help them in hacking the computer. He gave them the detailed information of the spaceship they were in. They realized that they were looking at the wrong thing, and instead of the spaceship, their main enemy ship was the whole space station. And after they find that out, they are soon greeted by Dr. Infinite. He quickly took Rick's gun and revealed that it was one of the Ricks who designed his ultimate weapon, the Unifier. He quickly turned Rick's gun into ashes and trapped his friends into a force field. However, he forgot about Bird Person. Bird Person was no match for Dr. Infinity, who told him that there are countless dimensions where he is a loyal captain of the Federation, where his will has been taken away, leaving only a mindless cyborg. After that, he reveals a very important bit of information. He says that it wouldn't be the first time the student killed the master. This catches Bird Person off guard, who questions what he meant by the student. He is totally outmatched by Dr. Infinity, which put the whole gang in shock and panic. Then Rick has an idea to leave the force field by digging the hole in the floor. It seems he created some kind of suit armor for Wubbo, which makes them able to rescue Bird Person. However, just like Bird Person, Wubbo was no match for Dr. Infinity, and in heroic manner he sacrificed himself to let his team escape the ship. Because of Wubbo's sacrifice, everyone, especially Rick, are in distress. Rick mentions how many things he wanted to tell Wubbo, and now he's unable to do so. Wubbo so far is one of the best characters that's been introduced in the series. He has been with us since the very first chapter of the comic, and in the end he was the reason why Rick met Bird Person in this universe. He was one of the integral parts of this team, and now, because of his sacrifice, this team has renewed motivation to avenge him. In the next scene, we see the crew going to Cybertrex. Rick is very amazed by how technologically advanced this planet is. If we look closely at the spaceships, they look a lot like Rick's own one. Maybe Rick took inspiration from this spaceship, who knows? We shortly meet one of the geared persons and 3 Squanches. The name of Squanch is High Commander Squancha. Bird Person introduces Rick to her, who is delighted to meet him. She then asks about Wubbo's whereabouts, which is replied by Bird Person by saying that he sacrificed himself to save them all. Wubbo died as a hero of the rebellion. In the next panel, we see so many interesting races. Alongside Bird Person, Rick, Gear Person, and Squanches, it seems that some female Gazorpians and Purge people were also part of this rebellion. At the end of the chapter, we are back on Earth. It seems Rick's house is attacked. We can see it being destroyed by one of the Ricks in an attempt to find Rick C-1031. However, he had already left the house to join the rebellion, which is how he avoided this encounter. However, we cannot say the same thing about Beth and Diane, whose fates in the C-1031 dimension remain unknown, and the chapter ends with this twist. The next chapter starts with the discussion between Dr. Infinity and one of his generals. Dr. Infinity is talking how everything that has transpired has done so according to his design, and that the universe itself should bend to his will. While he is talking about his plans, one of his generals tries to tell him about the sewage, which annoys Dr. Infinity and questions if they have people for that or not, and how that is his concern. He suddenly slips and unalives himself. However, it seems death itself wasn't really a problem for Dr. Infinity, since he just seems to get himself killed often. In fact, it is the 3rd time this month. We then see a silhouette of a person who is inside Dr. Manhattan's suit, and based on the skin and hair color, However, it seems that person is one of the Ricks. The scene then shifts into the rebel group. We are introduced to another familiar face, this time the Changeformers and the Nigerian. They have a discussion about the Gromflamite superweapon. Bird Person explains how they acquired the information on that, and despite them having a detailed information on the weapon, they cannot find a single weakness. Rick is annoyed by their lack of understanding and says that the weapon is not a planet killer, but a brain. He explains how it is shaped with systems structured like neural pathways all converging on the transmitter in the Doom Bob's Doom nipple. He then says how it is a process core, a frontal lobe, a medulla oblongata, and that the point of the transistor is to project that mind, which means that this machine is here to replace their minds with its own. We then see how the team is preparing for the attack. All of them suit up and enter in their spaceships. When the attack started, Rick decides to go ahead of everyone, and right before his ship is destroyed, he uses the eject button and flies towards the space station. The scene shifts back to the battlefield where we can see the Allies are not doing very successfully. They're losing a lot of their men, but they do not give up since it will mean the slavery of the entire galaxy. We then see Rick again, who is saddened by the person who is somehow trapped. He is confronted by Dr. Infinity, who tells him that he knows all about Rick Sanchez, more than the actual Rick does. Then he creates a very cool sword, which seems to be made of some kind of space material, but right before he could use it on Rick, the sword gets stuck in the wall. Rick tries to use this opportunity to create an opening, but he is unable to, since Dr. Infinity uses his weird manipulation ability. But Rick somehow avoids that and cuts Dr. Infinity's arm. Dr. Infinity then talks about his true goals and how he is creating the very mind of God himself, and how that mind will belong to him. It is revealed that he wasn't looking for the Gromflamites. He works for none but himself. Right before Dr. Infinity hits Rick with his space sword, Rick uses the electricity of the space station to direct the whole electricity to him. Thanks to that, he defeated him. But before Dr. Infinity is defeated, he says that he has hundreds of cloned bodies of himself on Unity Station. But he didn't let him end the sentence and just finished him. Then he sees that mysterious woman very sadly, and I guess he tries to save her. Maybe this is the true original form of Unity, who knows? The scene is then shifted to the battle. It seems the rebel groups are outnumbered and are losing the battle, when suddenly the enemy's space station is destroyed, which lets them win the war. In the next scene, we see a days later situation where they have a memorial for those who died during the rebellion. Out of nowhere, Rick crashed the memorial and revealed that he was the one who destroyed the space station. It seems they didn't know that he was alive, which would explain their surprised reactions. In the last scene of the chapter, we see Gromflam Prime. We are introduced to the leader of the Gromflamites, who is revealed to be President Thrax. She questions the whole Dr. Infinity idea and decides to go against him, but before she can do anything, she is confronted by him. We finally see his true form. To be honest, he reminded me of one of the evil Ricks that we can see in Rick C-137's flashback. Who knows, these two could be the same ones. However, we did not get a lot of information on this Rick, because this is how the whole series ends. The very last thing says that if they do not get a sequel, then we have to wonder what is going on. Since the last chapter was released almost a year ago, I do not have a lot of hope for new chapters, but for the past couple of months, this comic has become one of the most popular ones, and I have some hope that due to its success, we might get a continuation. I really enjoyed reading this one. It really showed us Rick and Morty and its universe in a whole different light. The characters who made their appearance in this comic made me realize how big and rich Rick and Morty's world building really is. We were finally able to see Rick's past, his bonding with Bird Person, Crumbopulous Michael, and many others. Maybe this Rick is different from Rick from the universe C-1031, but I still enjoyed reading it, and I do not think